front, but come on in, it's better than standing. The first thing that I wanted to do this morning is to thank all of you. You have really incredibly tough jobs. You make hundreds and hundreds of important decisions by the hour. And I know that you are starting this whole PLC process, and there are obstacles and challenges whenever you try something new. And I wanted to take a moment to tell you that I really appreciate all of your efforts, and that I applaud the things that you are trying and that you are attempting to do. One of the ways that we all need to support each other is by having professional development opportunities and chances to dialogue about the important work that we do. And before we get started on the work of today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some other professional development opportunities that are brand new to the district this year. If you look up at the screen, we now have something called My Learning Plan. And I'm going to show you how to get there. It's very, very simple. But it has CUSD200 classes on it that you can sign up for electronically. And we've had some very brave people that have volunteered to teach these classes, and the trainings really center around professional learning communities, Common Core, social emotional learning standards, technology, and also meeting the needs of diverse students. And now you can go online and see what all the class offerings are and sign up for them there. And we'll be able to keep track of all of our CPDUs, our CEUs, and then it'll be easier to have communication about the classes. So let me show you how you would get there. For example, you've got classes up here, Google Docs, you have Math Common Core, you have multimedia authoring using Movie Maker, and all that you would need to do is click on those, and you say sign up, and you click on sign up now, and you're already registered for the class. The way that you find this, you're at our website, you get there. All you need to do, under staff resources, there is this drop-down menu. It says My Learning Plan. All you would need to do is click on it. Your name and your password are the exact same name and password that you use for your email. It's no brand new thing. It's your AO number. You put all of that information in, you log in, and then you can look at all of the courses and the catalogs, look by month, and also sign up, find out where the locations are, and we expect all of these opportunities to grow throughout the year. We'll be sending you some information online. But if you're like me, I like the face-to-face a little bit, watch where the screen goes, look at and be able to click down. There are also going to be experts in each of the buildings that can help you with that too. But right now, classes are already there. You can spend a little time today or even over the weekend looking at the courses that are available and sign up for them. And now we're going to get started on today's work. These are the things that I am hoping that you will learn from our meeting today. I'm wanting you to be able, by the end of our session, to list 3 criteria used in determining an essential standard during a discussion with a colleague. Second thing, I want you to be able to, when given 2 learning targets, evaluate them to determine if the 3 necessary components are included. And the third thing I'd like you to walk away with today is that you'll be able to discriminate between measurable and non-measurable words, verbs in a word bank. I want to talk a little bit about essential standards and learning targets. Essential standards, and some of our books call them power standards. There's a few seats here still if you want to come in, and a few up there as well. The essential standards are the end of the year standards. They're really huge learnings that we want students to have. The learning targets are broken down into almost daily measurable items that we share with students. The little steps along the way to getting to the essential standards. As I've gone around the buildings, we've had some, I shouldn't say some, a lot of conversation about, well, how does this all fit with Common Core, Faith? How does that all work? So if you are looking at Common Core standards, there are many. You're not going to work on every single one of the Common Core standards with your PLCs and work toward having students have 100% of your students master that. You're going to go through those, or go through District 200 critical content, or come up with them on your own. What are the absolute key learnings you want students to have before they leave your classroom? Those are the essential standards. So if you were choosing to look at Common Core first, you would look at all of those and then choose some of the ones that your team feels is critical for the students at your school to be able to be ready for the next grade or the next course. Then we're going to look at learning targets, and learning targets are all those small things that support an essential standard, which might be a Common Core standard. This is a really busy slide. I did not expect you to read it from where you're at. It is a handout. I think it's on green paper. And we found this to be helpful to kind of narrow down the process. Starting at what do we want students to learn? You could start at Common Core, or you could start at writing your own standards, going to essential standards. We're going to talk all the way through this today, and then we're also going to give you a little role play or a skit of a typical third grade team as they work through the different steps in this triangle. Let's talk about essential standards, because that's the very first thing that a team needs to do. And there are 3 criteria by Doug Reeves that he uses to help teams decide if it's an essential standard or not. And the first one he calls leverage, and that's really whether it's critical to another content area. So if you're stumbling and kind of thinking about, is the standard we're wanting to choose really an essential standard, ask yourself, is it critical to other content areas? And then the second criteria he calls endurance, and it's really, is it important past a test date? Are kids going to need to know this 1-2 years out? And the third is readiness. Is it crucial for a student to master that standard to be successful in later courses? Those are the 3 criteria that you really need to be thinking about to help your team determine whether it's an essential standard. What I want you to do, and this will also give an opportunity for people to come in and sit down, is I want you to talk to a partner and think about the standards that are here and use the 3 criteria to determine whether you think it would be an essential standard or not. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. The rest of you are welcome to come in and find a seat. This is an actual standard from Common Core for reading grade 3. What are your thoughts? Hands up if you think essential. Keep your hands down if not. You're both right. Okay? On this standard, it definitely meets the criteria. But you have to determine as a team whether it meets your criteria to go on to the next grade level. It's going to be hard-pressed to go through Common Core, especially if you spend too long on this task, to find one that you think you can just throw out. But we need to get really, really focused and teach in depth. So you're as a team, yes, it's a well-written standard, yes, it's critical, but it also depends on your team, on whether you decide that it's an essential one that you will work on. Okay, how about the next one, PE? Students will measure their own pulse. Hands up if you thought yes. Yes, but it would be so much better if you applied it. Students will measure their own pulse and apply it to their exercise routine to determine lifelong fitness. You see how it gets going, okay? On this, students will measure their own pulse could almost be a daily learning target as well. So you want to have the application piece of it if you can for the essential standard. How about the next one, science? Identify 3 types of rocks. Essential standard or not? Not. Right? If you can Google it, the answer, it's not a standard. Math for grade 2. Compare 2 3-digit numbers based on blah, 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 blah. Yes. Yes. But math grade 2, that might not be the one that your team picks. Yes, it's critical, but you need to think about whether it's critical for the students that you have. This may be something most of your second graders already can do. But you need to think about this. All right, writing grade 5. We'll write a concise introductory sentence. Essential standard? No. Probably not. It's a very important skill. Does it meet leverage? Yes. Does it meet readiness? Yes. Do you need to know it past a couple of years? Yes. But it's more of a learning target. It's not global enough that you're going to make this an essential standard. Critical learning target, critical skill, but it's probably a subset of a bigger essential standard. All right, now that you have chosen your standard, or you may be writing them yourselves, because that's acceptable too. Now that you have the standard, you really need to look and make sure that it has 3 critical components. And we went through this whole process as a team at the SSC and found out how critical this piece is, or later on you get messed up when you write common formative assessments. This part you need to make sure you get right. It will save you grief later on. So these skills, concepts, and context. When you get your standard, and some people call this unpacking the standard, lots of you may have been to a class where you unpack standards. This is what happens. You go through and you circle the measurable verbs, you underline the nouns or the knowledge or the concepts, and then you put in brackets the context. Let me show you what that looks like. If we were talking about students will solve equations with decimals to solve 2-step real-world problems, if we just said solve equations with decimals, and we went out and some people did 1-step problems, and some people did 2-step, and some people just gave them straight computation. Without that context, you don't have a really great idea of where you're going. That context piece is going to be really important. Another one below that, if you're going to compare the overall structure, use all that, and 2 or more informational texts. Common Core does a lot of using 2 informational texts, 2 pieces of literature to be able to master this skill. And you're going to need to think about what context you want students to show their proficiency or their level at. What I'd like you to do, and it's not a quiet test, you can talk with your partner, is circle, underline, and bracket using these standards. Go ahead, if you don't have pencil and paper, just talk through it and take a couple minutes to do that. Are the easiest. They're the easiest to define. I think they're the hardest to write or revise. So on the very first one, you're thinking about what students will do, that verb. Did you circle solve? Yes. Okay, good. Then you're going to look at the concept, that skill, the group of nouns or the words that go along with the nouns, which would be word problems involving addition and subtraction of fractions, referring to the same and whole and having like denominators. Really long, okay? But that's the skills and the concepts. Then if you put it into context, they're going to be using visual fraction models and equations to represent the problem. Without that context, you could get much more difficult than what the standard actually is asking. Look at the second one. Distinguish their own point of view from that of the author of a text. Obviously the verb is distinguish, good. And the nouns, what'd you do? Your own point of view from the author of a text. Be careful with this one. What is the context? It's kind of missing. Okay? Point of view from the author of a text, it looks like text is the context, but until you put on that we're talking about grade level, 4th grade literature, you can see that that gets a little bit more complicated. You need to have the context of what students would be doing in order to master and show the standard. Measurable verbs are really, really important. If you think about Bloom's taxonomy, and you think about the difference between identify and evaluate, the verbs that you choose in the essential standards that you want students to be able to do need to be toward Bloom's taxonomy at the far end for some of them. We are trying to develop critical thinking. So you can't have all simple identify, list, those kinds of things. You also can't have they will appreciate. It's very difficult to measure appreciation. You need to have verbs that you can write a formative assessment from. So you need to think about what you're sharing with students, what you're talking about with each other, and think about the level of critical thinking that you're going to use. This is a very busy piece of paper. I do not expect you to look off of it here, but there is a yellow sheet in your handouts that lists all kinds of verbs, from simple thinking all the way over to more involved thinking. And what I would like you to do is stand up for a moment and talk with a partner about which ones are measurable. When you are done, sit down. Thumbs down if you think it's not. First one, realize. Yeah, hard to measure. Study. Hard to measure. Identify. Yes. Summarize. Yes. Write. Yes. Appreciate. I already gave that one. Model. Yes. You need to be thinking about measurable verbs. So after you have all your essential standards and you've gone through and looked and all three components and you're ready to go, then you need to think about that context piece. I have a standard up here: distinguish their own point of view from that of the author on grade level informational text. Okay, context is there. However, if you were to sit down and write a cognitive formative assessment off of this, there's still a few more questions. How long is the passage? Makes a huge difference. Is it a cold read? Makes a huge difference. Are we talking about having them writing a paragraph in response to answering this question, or is there a way to do it multiple choice? You can see that just getting this far, you need to go further to be able to write a formative assessment. And I do want to remind you, when we are looking at mastering a standard in reading, it needs to be on grade level text. You can measure it for text if a student is far behind, just to see if they can get that skill. But the object is to have all third graders at third grade reading. This is what the standard sheet looks like. You have it in your PLC binders. You don't have an extra handout here, but this organizes it for you to start off with what is the essential standard, then proficiency level, then we'd look at learning targets, then you'd write the common formative assessment and decide the extensions and go along with that. And as you go back to your buildings and you work on this, I encourage you to keep this out to kind of help you organize about what comes next. All right, I want you to think a little bit about this. I won't have you talk and turn to a partner, but what learning targets might be essential in order to have a student master this standard? Just think about it kind of silently to yourself. What are some learning targets? Because now that's the next step. We need to identify what learning targets are underneath that, so that when we give a common formative assessment and a student doesn't know it, we can go back and figure out where the holes are. Here's a few things I came up with. In order to be able to do that well, they're going to have speed and accuracy of multiplication facts. They're going to have to solve digit by double digit multiplication. They're going to have a really solid grasp of what multiplication is to be able to create word problems. And if a student can't do the standard, you also need to know, can they do those learning targets beneath it, or you won't have a good idea of what to do for an intervention. So those learning targets and sub-skills are really important. Okay, after you do all that, you have a standard, you have proficiency levels, you have targets. Now it's time for formative assessments. And as we learned, and we're going to do a little role play here in a minute, you have to do those three things really well before you get to the formative assessment, or you have to do a lot of backtracking. We had to do a lot of backtracking as we went through and did this together. So on the formative assessment, a few things that we learned that were really important to us is it does need to be closely aligned with the verbs that you chose. If you wrote that they will create and evaluate, and your formative assessment has them list, there's a disconnect there. So you have to make sure it's the same. You also need to make sure that you've agreed on what the level of proficiency is and that your assessment matches what you said students needed to be able to do to be proficient. It also needs to be quick and focused. A common formative assessment is not, we will now take 42 minutes to determine your proficiency level. It's an exit slip. It's an assignment. But I do want to caution you, it needs to be an individual assignment. It's not a group project. It's not a homework assignment because you don't know who helped them at home. It needs to be something quick that they do in class, and it needs to be individual. It can't be a group project because then you only know the collective efforts of the group. It also needs to give data by student by standard. You don't want to put 8 or 9 standards all on one end of unit test and score them with an 80%. Because you'll need to know which students mastered which standard. Now, to make this a little more real for you, I'm going to call some help up. And we have a little role play here. Let me introduce my 3rd grade team. I have Debbie Data, played by Joan Bonamy. I have Norma Norm, played by Meredith McCormick. I have Stephanie Standard, played by Kathy Bossier. And I also have Tina Target. She is a grade 3 through 5 ELL teacher. And she doesn't sit permanently on this team, but she comes in occasionally when the team needs some help. We're going to go ahead and let them get started.
Great, it's 8:30.
of the important tasks that they have to do. And then we would come into the next meeting. And this next meeting is fairly condensed, but I do want you to pay close attention because a lot happens in this next meeting. yellow sheet on the back. Instead of having this group fill out minutes, what I'd like you to do, and this is a template that's available on the district website that you could use for agendas and minutes. What I'd like you to do is just take a couple of minutes where it says circle the items to be discussed. Instead, I want you to circle the items that were discussed at this meeting. Take a couple of minutes to do that. They did a lot, and you would probably need more than a couple of meetings to do what they just did. It certainly took us many practices and sessions in our office to get this right. What they did, they determined standard proficiency, they wrote learning targets, and they began the discussion about formative assessments. Really, when you look at the PLC questions that the group worked on today, it was all about number one, what do we want students to learn and be able to do? And then, before this next meeting happened, they got together and they wrote common formative assessments. And they began to talk about question number two, how are we going to know whether students have mastered it or not? And what I wanted to share with you is a type of common formative assessment that we wrote. And we struggled a lot with this because we wanted to know whether students got the idea of comparison and contrast even when they weren't reading, because that's a different skill, and then if you add all of the reading on top of it, it gets more complicated. So we wanted to find a topic that we thought third graders would know a lot about, and my daughter's in fourth grade, so I immediately went to food, and we talked about breakfast and lunch. And we intend to have them compare and contrast breakfast and lunch by listing two ideas correctly in each of the Venn diagrams below. We're going to collect data on that, and the data is going to be shared at this next meeting. We also thought about our ELL students and our low-income students, and we wanted to make sure that we had a topic that we would really get at compare and contrast ability, not their background knowledge or that their vocabulary would get in the way. We also then looked at a more complicated formative assessment that we would use with students, and they would need to read and be able to do this. And we had to get very clear about what it is that we wanted students to do. If we do not share up front with them what it is we want them to show or demonstrate and be really clear about how many key ideas or how many details need to be listed, it becomes a guessing game. So you want to give really clear instructions to the students to know whether they would be able to master that or not. So a whole lot of time has gone by. They have the formative assessments, they have the data, okay? And now it's gotten a little colder, and we're back at another meeting.
Look at all that snow. It's really getting cold out. It's hard to get enough in the dark and exercising before work. Now that
And then they would begin the process again. Want to pay close attention to how they share data. It will be important not only to look at the data to determine what was best instructional practice, but to also really dig down to know what needs to be retaught and which students need the reteaching. This is a process. And we, collectively here, went through this process, I don't know, 19, 20 times till we got a common formative assessment, things that we wanted. It is not something you're going to sit down and feel confident about the first time you do it. The important thing is to do it. I need the Nike swoosh. Just do it. The conversations that we had here really helped each of us get more of a deeper understanding of what this work looks like. And the work that we put in front with that, creating the essential standard, using the measurable verbs, making sure that we have that context, helped a lot when we came to the formative assessment part. I know that you're going to go back to your buildings now and have a lot of concentrated time on this. I appreciate all the things that you are doing to work on this. These are other resources that you might want to look at. But your biggest resource are the people in this room. Thank you so much for what you are doing. Have a great day.